The mail-order bride was denied marriage for being black, standing frozen on the platform as her intended groom's bouquet fell at her feet like scattered dreams. Serafina Beaumont watched the prairie roses hit the dust, their petals already beginning to curl in the afternoon heat of Copper Creek Station. The words still hung in the air. Colored, mulatto, deceiver. Jasper McReady's face had transformed completely. One moment he held flowers and smiled. The next, revulsion twisted his features into something unrecognizable. The man who had written her tender letters for 6 months now looked at her as if she were something to be scraped from his boot. Mrs. Cordelia Whitmore stepped back into the crowd, satisfied with the chaos she had unleashed. Her voice had cut through the platform chatter like a blade. Recognition from New Orleans, the orphanage. Her grandmother's dark hands holding hers at charity events. All of it spilled now in the harsh Dakota sunlight. The crowd pressed closer, then farther away. Whispers moved like wildfire through the assembled townspeople. Sierra felt their stares like physical weight. Her traveling dress, carefully chosen and painstakingly sewn, suddenly felt like costume fabric. False, pretending to be something it was not. Just like her. The train's whistle echoed across the prairie as it prepared for departure. Her trunk sat beside her on the platform, containing everything she owned in the world. Her life savings had purchased the ticket west. There would be no return journey. Jasper mounted his horse without another word. He rode away toward the main street, leaving her surrounded by strangers who now knew her secret. The secret she had carried since childhood. The secret that had driven her from New Orleans to this dusty frontier town. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Stay safe. Stay quiet. Let them see what they expect to see. But Cordelia Whitmore had stolen that safety with a few pointed words. The platform began to empty as people drifted toward town, carrying news of the rejected bride. Their voices faded into the distance, but Sierra knew the story would spread faster than summer lightning. By evening, every person in Copper Creek would know what had happened at the station. She sat on her trunk and watched the horizon swallow the departing train. The sun hung lower now, casting longer shadows across the weathered boards. Soon darkness would come, and with it, the wolves Maggie Sweet had mentioned. Both kinds. A shadow fell across her hands. Sierra looked up to see a woman approaching, dark-skinned and dignified, moving with the careful grace of someone who had learned to navigate hostile territory. Magnolia Sweet stopped just outside the circle of scattered belongings. Her eyes held, understanding without pity. She had witnessed the entire spectacle from the general store porch, watching as dreams crumbled into dust and humiliation. Child, you can't sit here all night. Sierra's throat felt lined with sand. I have nowhere else to go. That's not entirely true. Maggie glanced toward town, where lamplight was beginning to flicker in windows. I run the Copper Dollar. It's respectable enough. You could have a room while you figure things out. Why would you help me? Maggie's smile held decades of hard-won wisdom, because nobody should face wolves alone. Movement at the edge of the platform caught Sierra's attention. A man knelt in the dust, gathering her scattered hair ribbons and the small leather journal that had fallen when Jasper threw her belongings aside. He worked methodically, treating each item with careful respect. Tobias Fairweather rose and approached them, holding the rescued possessions. His hat was dusty, his clothes worn but clean. His hands were gentle as he placed the items in her lap. A lady's belongings should be treated with respect. His voice carried quiet conviction. No apology for what had happened, because he bore no responsibility for it. No false sympathy, because that would only add to her humiliation. Just simple acknowledgement of her dignity in a moment when others had tried to strip it away. Sierra met his eyes briefly. They held something she had not expected to find in this place. Compassion without judgment. Strength without aggression. Thank you, He touched his hat brim and stepped back, but did not walk away. His presence offered protection without demanding gratitude, a buffer between her and anyone who might approach with cruel curiosity. Maggie gestured toward town. "My offer stands, first night's free. After that, we can discuss arrangements." The alternative stretched before Sierra like an endless plain. No money for passage anywhere else, no prospects, no connections beyond the letters she had exchanged with the man who now wanted nothing to do with her. But staying meant facing the whispers, the stares, the constant weight of being unwanted in a place where she had hoped to build a new life. Her grandmother's voice joined her. Mothers in memory, different words, different lessons. "Stand tall. Your worth is not determined by their acceptance." Sierra stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I accept your offer, Mrs. Sweet. Just Maggie." Tobias moved to lift her trunk without being asked. The weight of it seemed nothing in his capable hands. He waited for her to gather her smaller belongings, then fell into step beside them as they walked toward town. The main street of Copper Creek stretched ahead, lined with businesses that would soon learn of her existence. The post office where Jasper's letters had arrived with such promise. The general store where Mrs. Whitmore had purchased whatever brought her to the station at exactly the wrong moment. The church where Sierra had imagined she might be married within the month. All of it felt foreign now. Hostile territory that she would have to navigate with care. But she was walking forward instead of running away. That counted for something. The copper dollar sat at the end of the street. 2 stories of weathered wood with clean windows and a hand-painted sign. Not elegant, but solid. Respectable, as Maggie had claimed. Sierra paused at the threshold, understanding that crossing it would mark a point of no return. Inside lay the unknown. Behind her lay only the wreckage of abandoned dreams. She stepped through the door into her uncertain future. The copper dollar's interior held the scent of beeswax and lavender, unexpected in a frontier saloon. Sierra followed. Maggie up narrow stairs, her footsteps muffled by worn but clean carpet. The room at the end of the hall was small. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a window facing the street where her humiliation had played out hours before. Maggie set a lamp on the small table. "Breakfast comes with the room. After that, we'll see what arrangements suit us both." Sierra unpacked her sewing basket with deliberate care. Each needle and spool of thread represented possibility, skills that could not be taken away by cruel words or changed circumstances. Her fingers found the familiar weight of her good scissors, sharp enough to cut through the thickest fabric, sharp enough to cut through the threads that bound her to false hope. Below in the street, voices carried on the evening air. Her name, mixed with speculation and judgment. The story grew with each telling, as stories did in small towns. By morning, she would be a legend of deception rather than a woman seeking a new beginning. She unpacked her father's letters last, the ones her mother had hidden until her deathbed confession. Lieutenant Samuel Beaumont had written to his love with promises of marriage, of legitimacy, of a life together after the war ended. The war had taken him instead, leaving Marie Thibodeau to raise their daughter alone in a world that offered few choices to women of mixed heritage. Sierra folded the letters carefully. They were evidence of love, even if that love had been cut short by bullets and battlefield medicine. Her mother had chosen survival over pride, teaching her daughter to navigate society's expectations with careful performance, but performance could only last so long. Morning brought harsh sunlight through the thin curtains. Sierra dressed in her second-best dress, the blue wool that would not show dust or stains. Working clothes now, not the finery she had saved for meeting her intended husband. The Copper Dollar's main room served breakfast to a handful of patrons. Travelers mostly, passing through on their way to somewhere else. They glanced at her with curiosity, but without recognition. The story had not yet reached every ear in town. Maggie appeared with coffee and biscuits. There's a room behind the kitchen that's not being used. Good light for sewing. If you're planning to stay, I don't have much choice. There's always choice. Sometimes the options are just harder to swallow. Sira studied the older woman's face, reading decades of difficult choices in the lines around her eyes. Maggie had carved out a place for herself in hostile territory through sheer will and careful strategy. The copper dollar served liquor but maintained respectability. A delicate balance in a town where women's reputations hung by gossamer threads. What would you charge for the room? Depends on what you can offer in return. The door opened, letting in a shaft of dusty sunlight and the sound of boots on wooden floors. Tobias Fairweather entered, removing his hat as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. He moved to the bar where Maggie served him coffee without being asked. There, conversation was quiet, conducted in the shorthand of long acquaintance. Sira caught fragments, work drying up, McCready's influence spreading. The cost of taking stands in small towns where memory ran long and forgiveness came hard. Tobias glanced toward her table once, briefly, recognition without intrusion. He finished his coffee and left coins on the bar, more than the drink cost. Insurance against harder times. After he left, Maggie returned to Sira's table. That man's got more character in his little finger than McCready has in his whole body. It doesn't seem to be helping his prospects. Character's like good soil. Takes time to show what it can grow. Sira spent the morning exploring the back room Maggie had mentioned. It faced east, catching the best light. A large table dominated the space, scarred from years of use but solid. She could work here, build something from the wreckage of her plans. The front door's bell announced new arrivals throughout the day. Sira recognized the pattern of deliberate footsteps, the pause that meant someone was staring in her direction. Word had spread completely now. She was no longer anonymous. By afternoon, the whispers had organized into something more dangerous. A delegation of women appeared at the Copper Dollar's entrance, led by Mrs. Whitmore and including the banker's wife, the mayor's daughter, and 3 others whose husbands owned the largest businesses in town. Maggie met them at the door. The conversation was brief and pointed. Sira could not hear the words, but their meaning was clear in the rigid postures and sharp gestures. The delegation wanted her gone. Maggie's response was equally clear in the way she stood her ground and closed the door firmly behind them as they left. "Busy afternoon?" Sira asked when Maggie returned. Some folks have too much time on their hands. But the visit had consequences. That evening, fewer patrons entered the Copper Dollar. Those who came glanced nervously toward the back room where Sira had set up her sewing. The town was choosing sides, and neutrality was becoming impossible. Sira worked late into the night, taking in the seams of a dress she had made for her wedding. The blue silk would serve her better in a simpler style, suitable for a working woman rather than a bride. Each stitch was a small act of transformation, changing dreams into practical reality. The next morning brought Tobias again, earlier this time. He carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, which he set on the bar before accepting his coffee. Maggie unwrapped it to reveal fresh venison, cleaned and portioned for cooking. "Thought you might have use for this. What do I owe you?" "Nothing. Had good hunting yesterday." Sira understood the lie beneath his generosity. Game was never plentiful enough to give away without thought. This was charity disguised as friendship, offered in a way that preserved everyone's dignity. When Tobias prepared to leave, Sira intercepted him at the door. "Thank you." "For what?" "You know what." He met her eyes directly. "A man does what he can, even when it costs him work, especially then." She watched him walk down the street toward the livery stable, noting how other men stepped aside or turned away. His support was costing him exactly what McCready had threatened. In a territory where reputation meant survival, Tobias was spending his freely. The weight of that sacrifice settled on her shoulders alongside her own troubles. That afternoon, Sira hung a small sign in the Copper Dollar's window. Seamstress. Alterations and new garments. Reasonable rates. The letters were carefully formed in her best handwriting, each one an act of defiance against those who wanted her to disappear. Within an hour, the first customer appeared, Mrs. Chen from the Chinese laundry, carrying a dress that needed hemming for her daughter. She spoke little English, but her gestures were clear. Work was needed. Payment was offered. Sira accepted both with quiet gratitude. By evening, 2 more women had appeared with sewing needs. Both glanced nervously over their shoulders before entering. Both paid in cash and left quickly. But they came, despite the social pressure building against anyone who helped her. Maggie tallied the day's earnings with satisfaction. Roots taking hold. Sira understood the metaphor. Like prairie grass after fire, she was beginning to grow in ground that others thought had been cleared. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was happening. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer impossible. She had found allies in unexpected places and discovered strength she had not known she possessed. The mail-order bride who had been rejected was becoming someone else entirely. Someone who might actually survive in this harsh, beautiful, unforgiving land. 3 weeks after her public rejection, Sira had established a rhythm in the back room of the Copper Dollar. Sunrise brought coffee and the careful arrangement of her tools. Scissors sharp enough to cut truth from lies. Thread strong enough to hold broken things together. Needles that could pierce the toughest fabric with patience and pressure. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, taking in a waist here, lengthening a hem there. Each completed garment was a small victory against those who expected her to fail. Tobias appeared most mornings now, carrying supplies that Maggie claimed to need. Flour from the mill. Fresh eggs from the farm outside town. Always something practical, never acknowledged as the kindness it was. He would drink his coffee in silence, reading the week-old newspapers that arrived on the Tuesday stage. This morning he carried wildflowers instead of provisions. Prairie roses and Indian paintbrush tied with a piece of rough twine. He set them on the bar without explanation, but his eyes found Sira through the doorway to her workroom. She looked up from the shirt she was mending. Their gazes held for a moment that stretched longer than propriety allowed. Heat climbed her neck, and she bent back to her work, but the flowers drew her attention throughout the morning. Maggie arranged them in a glass jar and placed them where the light would catch their colors. Man who brings flowers has something on his mind. Maybe he just thought they were pretty. Men don't pick pretty things unless they're thinking about someone specific. By afternoon, the flowers had begun to open fully, releasing their sweet scent into the close air of the workroom. Sira found herself glancing at them between stitches, remembering Tobias's calloused hands holding the delicate stems. The doors. Bell announced another visitor. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house entered with a bundle of men's shirts that needed buttons replaced. She was one of the few women in town who would openly conduct business with Sira, though she always looked nervous about it. These belonged to a boarder who left without paying, she explained. Thought I might get some use from them if they were mended proper. Sira examined the shirts. Good fabric, well made originally. A few hours of work would make them serviceable. Again, I can have them ready by Friday. That would suit me fine. Mrs. Patterson hesitated at the door. There's talk of a town meeting about your situation. The needle in Sira's hand stilled. What kind of talk? The kind that don't usually end well for folks like you. After Mrs. Patterson left, Sira sat staring at the shirts spread across her work table. Each one represented hours of labor, but what good were mended clothes if she was not allowed to remain in town to deliver them? Evening brought Tobias again, this time with a leather-bound book tucked under his arm. He approached her workroom doorway with uncharacteristic hesitation. Thought you might like something to read. The book was poetry. Worn pages that had been handled with care, margins filled with penciled notes in his careful handwriting. She opened it randomly and found verses about freedom and dignity, passages underlined with conviction. Thank you. Keep it as long as you like. She traced one of his penciled comments with her fingertip. His thoughts lived in these margins, his beliefs laid bare in careful cursive. A man who read poetry was not what she had expected to find. In this harsh territory, you've marked it thoroughly. Words have power. The important ones deserve remembering. That night, Sira read by lamplight until her eyes grew heavy. The poem spoke of struggle and triumph, of finding beauty in broken places. Tobias had marked passages about hope persisting through darkness, about dignity maintained despite external circumstances. The next morning brought storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Wind whipped dust through the streets, and shutters banged against building walls. The atmospheric pressure seemed to mirror the tension building in town. Sira was pinning fabric when the door opened again. This time it was not a customer, but Mrs. Whitmore, flanked by the mayor's wife and two other women whose husbands controlled significant portions of the local economy. Maggie moved to intercept them, but Mrs. Whitmore pushed past toward Sira's workroom. We need to discuss your presence in our community. Sira set down her pens with deliberate care. I'm conducting legal business on private property. Your kind of business is not welcome here. My kind of business is sewing. Last I checked, that was still considered respectable work. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed with anger. Don't play innocent with me. You know exactly what you are and what problems you bring. The other women shifted uncomfortably. Whatever they had expected from this confrontation, Sira's calm dignity was not it. She stood behind her work table, tools arranged neatly, evidence of honest labor surrounding her. I bring needle and thread. I bring fair prices for good work. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why. The town council will be addressing this matter formally. Then I suppose I'll see you there. After they left, Maggie appeared with coffee that Sira's hands shook too much to hold steady. The confrontation had drained her more than she wanted to admit. Each word had been a battle, each calm response an act of will over fear. You handled that well, did I? I feel like I'm fighting shadows. Sometimes shadows are all we get to fight. Doesn't make the fighting less important. That afternoon, Tobias arrived earlier than usual. He had heard about the morning's visitors from someone at the livery stable. News traveled fast in small towns, especially news that involved conflict. He found Sira in the back alley behind the Copper Dollar, hanging shirts on the line Maggie had strung between two posts. The wind whipped the wet fabric and made this simple task more difficult than it should have been. Let me help. He held the clothespins while she wrestled shirts into position. Their hands brushed as they worked, brief touches that sent warmth up her arms despite the cold wind. They're organizing against you. I know, it's not right. Right and wrong don't seem to carry much weight in these discussions. They finished hanging the laundry in companionable silence. The storm was moving closer, dark clouds building into towering walls that promised rain or worse. Lightning flickered in the distance, too far away for thunder, but close enough to make the air feel electric. I've been thinking, Tobias said, as they gathered the empty basket. About what? About what Mrs. Patterson said. About town meetings and situations that don't end well. Sira folded a stray clothespin with more attention than it deserved. And, if they force you to leave, where would you go? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address directly. If she left, would he follow? If she stayed and fought, would he stand beside her? The answers lived in the space between spoken words, in glances, held too long in conversations that danced around deeper truths. I don't know. she said finally. Maybe you won't have to find out. Thunder rolled across the prairie, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. They hurried inside, leaving the storm to rage outside while something equally tempestuous built between them and the safety of Maggie's kitchen. The town meeting was scheduled for the following week. Until then, Sira would continue her work, continue building the life she had claimed for herself in this unforgiving place. Whether that life would include the man who brought her flowers and poetry remained to be seen. But for the first time since stepping off the train, she dared to hope it might. The night before the town meeting, Sira packed her father's papers with trembling hands. The leather portfolio had belonged to Lieutenant Samuel Beaumont, carried through battles she could only imagine. Inside were documents that could change everything or destroy what little she had built. Her mother's voice whispered from memory. Some truths are too dangerous to tell. But her grandmother's voice answered stronger. Some truths are too important to hide. The papers rustled as she arranged them in order. Military commission, land grant certificate, letters of commendation from superior officers. And at the bottom, the document that would either save her or damn her completely. The deed to 40 acres of Dakota Territory, signed by the territorial governor and witnessed by the land office. Property that legally belonged to her as Samuel Beaumont's only heir. Dawn came gray and cold. Sira dressed in her best remaining dress, the black wool she had worn to her mother's funeral. Somber enough for the gravity of what lay ahead, dignified enough to command respect from men who would rather see her disappear. The town hall filled early. Sira arrived to find every seat occupied and more people standing along the walls. Word had spread beyond Copper Creek. Neighboring ranchers had ridden in to witness the spectacle. The woman who had tried to pass for white would finally be dealt with properly. She walked down the center aisle carrying her father's portfolio. Eyes followed her progress, some curious, others hostile. Near the front, Mrs. Whitmore sat with the other prominent wives, their faces set in righteous satisfaction. McCready lounged in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for vindication. Tobias stood against the back wall, hat in his hands. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once, a gesture of support that gave her strength to continue forward. Mayor Henderson called for order with unnecessary force. The gavel's bang echoed through the packed room. He read the meeting's purpose from a prepared statement, his voice carrying the weight of predetermined conclusions. We're here to address the disruption caused by the presence of one Serafina Beaumont, who obtained residence in our community through deception and false representation. Mrs. Whitmore rose first, her testimony polished and damning. She described the scene in New Orleans, the colored orphanage, the obvious mixed heritage that Sira had attempted to conceal. Her words painted a picture of deliberate fraud, of a woman who had stolen a white woman's rightful place through trickery and lies. The crowd murmured approval. This was the story they wanted to hear, simple, clear, easy to judge. McCready followed, his voice carrying wounded pride disguised as moral outrage. He had been the victim of deception, he claimed, his reputation damaged by association with someone who had misrepresented herself so completely. I have standards, he declared. This community has standards. We cannot allow them to be compromised by those who refuse to know their place. More murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. The case against her was building momentum, each testimony adding weight to the call for her removal. When her turn came, Sira rose slowly. The portfolio felt heavy in her hands, weighted with history and hope. She walked to the front of the room and turned to face the assembled crowd. My name is Serafina Beaumont, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. I am the daughter of Lieutenant Samuel Beaumont, who served this country with honor in the Union Army. She opened the portfolio and withdrew the military commission. The official seal caught the lamplight as she held it up for all to see. And I am the daughter of Marie Thibodeau, who raised me with dignity and strength in circumstances that would have broken lesser women. The room stirred. This was not the cowering defense they had expected. I am proud of both sides of my family. I am proud of my father's service to preserve this union. I am proud of my mother's courage in raising a child alone in a world that offered her few choices. She reached into the portfolio again and withdrew the land grant certificate. The rustling paper seemed loud in the suddenly quiet room. I am also the legal heir to property in this territory. 40 acres granted to Lieutenant Samuel Beaumont. For his military service, property that passes to me by right of inheritance. Mayor Henderson leaned forward, squinting at the documents. Let me see those papers. Syrah approached the council table and placed the certificate before him. Henderson examined it carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise, to something approaching concern. This appears to be genuine. It is genuine. My father earned that land with his blood and service. I inherit it by law, not by anyone's permission. Mrs. Whitmore rose from her seat, face flushed with anger. Legal papers don't change what she is. They don't change the deception. What deception? Syrah turned to face her accuser directly. I never claimed to be anything other than Seraphina Beaumont. You made assumptions based on my appearance. Your assumptions were incomplete, not my identity false. The room erupted in competing voices. Some shouted support for Mrs. Whitmore's position. Others called for examination of the legal documents. The neat narrative of fraud and deception was cracking under the weight of more complex truths. I have never hidden my name or my parentage, Syrah continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. I have conducted myself with honesty and dignity. I have worked hard and paid my debts. I have treated everyone in this community with respect, even those who have shown me none in return. She gestured toward the portfolio still lying open on the council table. Those papers prove my legal right to remain in this territory. But more than that, they prove something else. They prove that I come from people who served this country, who sacrificed for its ideals, who believed in justice and equality. Tobias pushed away from the wall where he had been standing. His movement drew attention as he walked toward the front of the room. When he reached Sarah's side, he stopped and faced the crowd. I've listened to a lot of talk tonight about standards and proper behavior, he said. I've heard people claim moral authority based on the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had seen enough of the world to judge it accurately. But I've also seen how this woman conducts herself. I've seen her work hard and treat people fairly. I've seen her show grace under circumstances. That would have broken most folks in this room. The silence stretched taut as wire. If we're talking about standards, maybe we should consider what kind of community we want to be. One that judges people by the content of their character, or one that drives away decent folks based on fear and prejudice. Mayor Henderson studied the land grant certificate again, then looked up at the crowd. The political calculation was visible in his expression. Legal documents carried weight that social pressure could not override. The certificate appears to be in order, he announced finally. Mrs. Beaumont has legal standing as a property owner in this territory. The words fell into the charged atmosphere and changed everything. Property ownership meant legal rights that could not be dismissed by community sentiment. It meant a voice that could not be silenced by social pressure. But it also meant a target that could not be easily removed. Mrs. Whitmore's face had gone pale with rage. McCready sat forward in his chair, hands clenched into fists. The simple solution they had expected was slipping away, replaced by legal complications and uncomfortable questions about their own motivations. Syrah gathered her father's papers and returned them to the portfolio. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. She had claimed her legal right to remain, but she had also made enemies who would not forget or forgive. The room began to empty, conversations fragmenting into smaller groups. Some people approached to examine the documents more closely. Others left quickly, unwilling to be associated with either side of the controversy. Tobias waited until most of the crowd had dispersed before approaching her. That took courage. It took desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Outside, the night air felt clean after the close atmosphere of the town hall. Stars emerged as clouds cleared, distant lights in vast darkness. Sira looked up at them and felt the weight of her father's legacy settling on her shoulders. She had won the right to stay. Now she had to decide whether that victory was worth the cost it would surely demand. The morning after the town meeting brought unusual quiet to Copper Creek's main street. Sira worked at her sewing table, but fewer customers appeared than in previous weeks. Word of her legal victory had spread, but so had the depth of opposition she faced. Some people who had quietly supported her now seemed afraid to be seen entering the copper dollar. Maggie counted coins at the bar, her expression grim. Business is down by half. Because of me. Because of fear. Different thing. Entirely. Through the window, Sira watched Mrs. Whitmore cross the street to avoid passing directly in front of the saloon. The woman's face held a peculiar satisfaction that seemed misplaced given her defeat at the town meeting. By afternoon, the reason became clear. Sheriff Morrison appeared at the door, his hat in his hands and reluctance written across his weathered features. "Mrs. Beaumont, I need to speak with you about your property claim." Sira set down her needle. "What about it?" "There's been some questions raised about the validity of the documents." "What kind of questions?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Whitmore has connections back east, telegraph connections. She's been making inquiries about your father's military service." The words fell into the quiet room with the weight of approaching storm clouds. Sira felt the foundation she had claimed beginning to shift beneath her feet. And what did her inquiries reveal? Nothing wrong with the documents themselves. They're genuine enough. But there's questions about whether you're actually Samuel Beaumont's legal heir. Maggie appeared from behind the bar, moving closer to Sira in an instinctive gesture of protection. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that come up when there's no official marriage certificate on file. When a man dies without acknowledging paternity in legal documents." The room seemed to contract around Sira. Her mother's deathbed confession echoed in memory. Samuel had loved her, had promised marriage, but the war had taken him before he could legitimize their union. Without legal marriage, Sira's claim to inheritance existed in a gray area of territorial law. "How long do I have?" "The territorial court will need to review the case. Could take weeks. Could take months. And in the meantime?" Morrison looked genuinely pained. "In the meantime, Mrs. Whitmore has filed a complaint claiming you obtained residence in this territory under false pretenses. There's talk of having you removed until the inheritance question is settled." After the sheriff left, Sira sat staring at her hands. The calluses from sewing had grown thicker over the past weeks, evidence of honest labor. But honest labor might not be enough to keep her in a place where powerful people wanted her gone. Maggie poured whiskey without being asked. "That woman's got more tricks than a traveling magician. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. Smart and mean often travel together." That evening, Tobias arrived to find Sira packing her few belongings into the same trunk that had carried her hopes from New Orleans. His face went carefully blank, the expression of a man absorbing a blow he had not expected. "Running? Tactical retreat. Where to?" Sira folded her father's letters with deliberate care. "Somewhere I can think without people trying to drive me out. That's not what this is." She looked up from her packing. "Then what is it?" "This is you giving up just when they're most afraid of you." "Afraid?" "They're about to have me legally removed." Tobias moved closer, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Mrs. Whitmore didn't go to all this trouble because she thinks you're powerless. She went to this trouble because she knows you're not. The truth in his words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. If her presence meant nothing, why work so hard to eliminate it? If her claim carried no weight, why bring in lawyers and territorial courts to dispute it? Even if you're right, I can't fight this from jail. You don't have to fight it from jail. You have to fight it from here, where people can see what you're made of. Sierra sank onto the bed, her trunk half packed, her future uncertain. I'm tired of fighting, I know. I'm tired of being strong all the time. I know that too. Tobias sat beside her on the narrow bed, careful to maintain proper distance while offering comfort through simple presence. His hands rested on his knees, work roughened and steady. My father died before I was born, Sierra said finally. My mother spent her whole life paying for loving him. I thought I could escape that pattern by coming here, by starting fresh. Maybe you still can. How? They'll find every legal weakness, every social irregularity. They'll use it all against me. Maybe, but you've got something they don't. What's that? Truth. And people who care about truth. Outside, wind rattled the windows with promises of another storm. The weather had been unsettled for days, as if the sky reflected the turmoil below. Sierra found herself thinking about roots and storms, about things that bent but did not break. If I stay, it won't just be my fight anymore. It hasn't been just your fight for weeks. The next morning brought disturbing news. Mrs. Patterson arrived at the Copper Dollar with her usual bundle of mending, but her hands shook as she set it on the work table. There's been developments, she said quietly. What kind of developments? Legal kind. Mrs. Whitmore has brought in a lawyer from the territorial capital. Man named Hutchinson. He's got papers. Sarah's heart sank. What kind of papers? The kind that question everything about your father's service record. They're claiming the land grant was issued in error, that Samuel Beaumont never had legal right to receive territorial property. The attack was more sophisticated than Sierra had anticipated. Mrs. Whitmore was not just questioning her inheritance, but the validity of the original grant itself. If successful, the challenge would eliminate her legal standing entirely. There. Also saying, Mrs. Patterson continued reluctantly, that Marie Thibodeau was already married when she took up with your father. That even if he had lived, any union would have been invalid. The words hit Sierra with physical force. Her mother had been a woman of strict moral principles, devoted to her daughter and careful about her reputation. The suggestion that she had been involved in adultery was not just legally damaging, but personally devastating. Is any of it true? I don't know. Records from that time are scattered. Easy to lose things. Easy to create things that never existed. That afternoon, Sierra sat in her workroom staring at the legal documents spread across her table. Birth certificate. Father's letters. Military records. Land grant certificate. Each piece of paper represented a life, a relationship, a promise that powerful people were now trying to erase. Tobias found her there when he arrived with the day's hunting. His presence filled the doorway, solid and reassuring in a world that seemed increasingly unstable. Bad news travels fast in small towns. How much do you know? Enough to know they're playing for keeps this time. Sierra gathered the papers into a neat stack. They might win. They might. And if they do? Tobias crossed to the window and looked out at the street where Mrs. Whitmore was emerging from the lawyer's office with a satisfied expression. If they do, we'll know what kind of place this really is. Is that enough? For some things. Yes, for others, no. The evening light was fading when Maggie appeared with coffee and grim determination. She had spent the day making her own inquiries, using connections built over years of careful business relationships. There's something you need to know about our Mrs. Whitmore, she said, settling into the chair across from Sierra's work table. What kind of something? The kind that changes everything. Maggie opened a folder filled with telegraph messages and handwritten notes. Your friend Mrs. Whitmore has been very busy since arriving in Copper Creek, but her business isn't what she's been claiming. Sarah leaned forward, studying the documents. What has she been claiming? That she's here visiting family. That she recognized you by accident. That her only interest is protecting the community's moral standards. And the truth? Maggie's smile held the satisfaction of a hunter who had found the right trail. The truth is more interesting, and a lot more profitable. The folder contained evidence that would change everything. Mrs. Whitmore's real motivations, her financial connections, her systematic campaign to destroy Sarah's legal standing. All of it documented in telegrams and bank records that Maggie had carefully assembled. How did you get all this? Same way information always travels in small towns. Carefully, quietly, and through people who pay attention to things that don't add up. Sarah studied the documents with growing amazement. The woman who had positioned herself as the moral guardian of Copper Creek was actually something far different. Something that would shock the community that had embraced her cause. This changes everything. It does. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, marking the end of a day that had transformed defeat into possibility. The storm that had been building for weeks was finally beginning to break. The evidence spread across Maggie's table revealed Mrs. Whitmore's true purpose in Copper Creek. Telegraph records showed payments from Eastern creditors. Bank documents revealed debts that stretched back years. Most damning of all, correspondence proved she had tracked Sarah deliberately, not encountered her by accident. Mrs. Cordelia Whitmore owed Lieutenant Samuel Beaumont's estate nearly $3,000. Money borrowed by her late husband during the war. Money that legally transferred to Sarah as Beaumont's heir. She's been running from this debt for 15 years, Maggie explained. Moving from town to town, staying ahead of creditors. When she heard about a mixed-race woman claiming Beaumont inheritance, she saw a chance to eliminate the debt permanently. Sarah traced the letterhead on one of the documents. By eliminating me. If you have no legal standing, you can't collect. What's owed? Simple as that. The revelation transformed everything. Mrs. Whitmore's moral crusade was actually financial desperation disguised as righteous indignation. The woman who claimed to protect community standards was a debtor fleeing her obligations. What do we do with this information? Maggie gathered the papers with careful precision. We present it to people who matter. Starting with Sheriff Morrison. The next morning brought news that Mrs. Whitmore's lawyer had filed additional challenges to Sarah's inheritance claim. Hutchinson was thorough, questioning every document, every date, every signature. His strategy was clear: create enough legal confusion to delay any resolution indefinitely. But he had not anticipated Maggie's investigation. Sheriff Morrison examined the financial documents with growing astonishment. The debt records were meticulously maintained, showing compound interest over 15 years. Mrs. Whitmore now owed Sarah's father's estate nearly $5,000. This changes the legal landscape considerably, Morrison admitted. If Mrs. Whitmore is a debtor to the estate, her motives for challenging the inheritance become suspect. Suspect enough to dismiss her complaints. Suspect enough to require disclosure to the territorial court. Word of the revelation spread through Copper Creek with the speed of prairie fire. By afternoon, clusters of men gathered outside the general store and the bank, discussing the implications in hushed tones. The woman they had supported as a moral authority was revealed as something far different. McCready emerged from the lawyer's office looking haggard. His alliance with Mrs. Whitmore had cost him credibility and social standing. Now, with her true motives exposed, his position became untenable. Tobias found Sarah in her workroom, mending a shirt with steady hands despite the turmoil surrounding her. Her composure in the face of crisis impressed him more each day. The town's buzzing with news. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. Mrs. Whitmore's packing her bags. Sierra set down her needle. Running again? Seems that way. Hutchinson withdrew his legal challenges this morning. Without her financial backing, the court case collapses. Through the window, they watched Mrs. Whitmore loading a carriage with her belongings. Her face held the pinched expression of someone whose carefully laid plans had crumbled. She moved with the haste of a person who needed to leave town before more uncomfortable questions arose. "She won't be the last," Sierra said quietly. "The last what?" "The last person who sees me as a problem to be solved rather than a neighbor. To be accepted." Tobias moved closer to the window, studying the scene outside. Maybe, but she might be the last one with the power to do anything about it. That evening, Mayor Henderson appeared at the Copper Dollar with official documents and an expression of reluctant respect. The territorial court had reviewed Mrs. Whitmore's financial obligations and ruled that her challenges to Sierra's inheritance lacked legal merit. "Your claim to your father's property is upheld," he announced formally. The court also notes that you're owed significant compensation from the Whitmore estate. Sierra accepted the papers with hands that remained steady despite the magnitude of what they represented. Legal recognition, financial security, the right to remain in Dakota Territory, not as a tolerated intruder, but as a legitimate property owner. "There's something else," Henderson continued. "The school board has been discussing the need for a teacher. Someone with education and moral character." The offer hung in the air between them. Teaching would provide steady income and social respectability. It would also make her a permanent part of the community rather than a temporary resident. "I'll consider it. The position comes with a house. Small but decent, near the school." After Henderson left, Sierra walked to the window and looked out at the street where her humiliation had begun months earlier. The same dust, the same buildings. But everything had changed, including herself. Maggie appeared with coffee and quiet satisfaction. From mail-order bride to property owner to schoolteacher, that's quite a transformation. The transformation isn't finished yet. What's left to transform? Sierra turned from the window. "The part where I decide whether to build a life here or take my legal victory and leave." "What's holding you back?" The answer walked through the door before Sierra could voice it. Tobias entered carrying wildflowers, his third visit that day. His concern for her welfare had become a steady presence, reliable as sunrise. He set the flowers on her work table without ceremony. "Thought you might like something beautiful after all the legal documents. Thank you. There's something I need to say." Sierra set down her coffee, recognizing the gravity in his tone. "What is it? I know you're thinking about leaving. After everything that's happened, it would make sense. Fresh start somewhere else, away from people who know your story. But I'm hoping you'll stay." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. He was asking her to choose not just a place but a future. Not just residency but relationship. Why? Because this place needs people who fight for what's right. Because those children need a teacher who understands what it means to overcome obstacles. He paused, his hands working the brim of his hat. "And because I need you." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Sierra felt the last walls around her heart beginning to crumble. This man had stood beside her when standing was costly, had supported her when support was dangerous, had seen her at her lowest moments and chosen to stay. "I need you too." The admission freed something in both of them. Tobias crossed the small room and took her hands in his calloused ones. They were hands that had worked hard, fought battles, built things that lasted. "Will you marry me?" "Yes." 6 months later, Sierra stood in the schoolhouse she had helped build, watching children of all backgrounds bent over their lessons. The morning light streamed through windows that Tobias had installed, illuminating faces eager to learn. Her wedding ring caught the sunlight as she moved between desks, helping with arithmetic and reading. The simple gold band had belonged to Tobias's grandmother, passed down through generations of women who had made lives in difficult places. After school, she walked to the small house she shared with her husband. The garden was beginning to flourish, vegetables and flowers growing in soil that had seemed too harsh to nurture anything beautiful. Tobias waited on the porch, as he did most evenings, ready to hear about her day. Their conversation flowed easily, built on months of shared struggles and quiet moments of understanding. Mrs. Whitmore's debt had been settled through the courts, providing enough money to establish the school and purchase supplies for years to come. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community had been built on truth rather than prejudice. That night, as they sat watching stars emerge over the prairie, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. The mail-order bride who had been rejected for her heritage had become a woman who embraced all parts of herself. The transformation was complete, but the story continued. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to build the inclusive community she had envisioned. Each day offered chances to prove that love could transcend the boundaries others tried to impose. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, carrying other dreamers toward uncertain futures. Sarah listened to the sound and smiled, remembering her own arrival and the hope that had sustained her through the darkest moments. Some dreams died hard. Others transformed into something better than originally imagined. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.